I'm Claire Dawson, 31, and the only thing heavier than my mother's silence was her disappointment when I tried to help her. For years, I thought it was love that made me step up when no one else did. When the calls came in the middle of the night, when the medical bills arrived like threats written in numbers, when her breath came in gasps and fear turned into a routine emotion, I was the one who showed up. I handled the hospital admissions, argued with insurance clerks, researched treatments. I paid for the surgery she couldn't afford and never asked me for, but also never refused. It wasn't until I mentioned it once, casually at a family lunch, that I understood how deeply I had misunderstood our entire relationship. She didn't thank me. She didn't even meet my eyes. She whispered, "I didn't ask you to," like it was a verdict, and suddenly the weight I'd been carrying for her turned into a sentence I hadn't realized I was serving. We weren't poor growing up, not by the standards of our suburban Virginia neighborhood, but we were emotionally bankrupt in all the ways that mattered. My father disappeared into his second family when I was 14, and my mother, Lorraine, collapsed inward instead of reaching outward. She got quiet, like grief had pressed a mute button only she could unpress. I became the adult in the house by default, cooking dinner, handling bills, listening to her breathe in the dark when she thought I was asleep, her anxiety louder than the silence. She never asked for help. That was her armor. And I learned, early, that needing her to say thank you was the same as asking her to be someone she wasn't. So I stopped needing it, or I thought I had, until the day I realized I had built an entire life on trying to earn it anyway. I moved to DC after college, took a job in nonprofit finance, climbed every invisible ladder by sheer force of will. My mother never visited, not once. But when she got sick, the call came anyway. "They say it might be ovarian," she said, her voice thin, like it was traveling across time zones instead of counties. I took a leave of absence. I emptied my savings account. I never hesitated, because that's what you do for family, isn't it? You show up. You step in. You bleed quietly, hoping they'll notice. I coordinated appointments, fought with surgeons, hand-delivered paperwork, and when the hospital wouldn't proceed without a payment plan, I took out a personal loan. I told myself it didn't matter if she never said thank you. I was doing the right thing. I believed that. The lunch was at my cousin Beth's house 2 months after Mom's surgery. I'd brought soup because she wasn't eating much and I thought it might help. Everyone was gathered around the table, chatting about Beth's new kitchen remodel and my uncle's retirement plans. Someone asked how Lorraine was doing, and I answered without thinking. "Recovering well. It's been tough, but worth it. I covered her surgery. Wasn't cheap, but you can't put a price on someone's life, right?" I smiled, looking around, waiting for someone to acknowledge the weight of what I'd done. My mother was silent. Then she said, quietly but clearly, "I didn't ask you to." And the room froze. It wasn't embarrassment I felt. It was erasure. As if all the nights in hospital chairs, the forms, the fear, the bills, none of it had happened. Or if it hadn't mattered. I excused myself early that day, claiming a call from work. But I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving away. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was confused, like I had misread the entire emotional map of my life. I had thought my love had been a kind of currency, something I could spend to buy closeness, gratitude, maybe even healing. But love, I was learning, doesn't work like that, especially not with someone who's built their identity around not needing anything. Her words haunted me in the following days. "I didn't ask you to." It sounded like a curse, but also like the only honest sentence she'd spoken to me in years. I didn't stop helping her, of course not. But something inside me cracked that day, like the surface of a frozen lake. I began replaying every childhood moment through a new lens. The school play she missed, the college acceptance letter she barely acknowledged, the way she always introduced me as, "Claire, she's very independent," as if that was a compliment instead of a chronic condition. I began to wonder if I'd ever really been her daughter in the way I'd wanted to be, or if I was just a caretaker she never requested, a shadow trying to earn a place in her light. And once I asked myself that question, I couldn't stop the others from coming. The thing about growing up with a parent who doesn't show affection is that you start to believe your emotional hunger is a flaw. As a teenager, I used to write fake letters to myself, notes I imagined a mother might leave in a lunchbox or taped to a bathroom mirror. "You've got this, Claire. I'm proud of you." I'd read them before school, pretending they had weight, pretending they meant something. By the time I hit 16, I didn't need the notes anymore. I'd internalized the silence as normal. My mother loved me, I told myself. She just wasn't built for softness. Her version of love was survival. Bills paid on time, food in the fridge, clean laundry. Anything more was sentimental clutter. When my father left, he didn't shout. He packed his things in a quiet rage, like someone finishing a tedious chore. I remember watching him zip his suitcase with methodical precision while my mother sat at the kitchen table, staring into the steam rising from her coffee. No tears, no begging, just a vacuum of emotion so profound it made the air feel thinner. He kissed my forehead, said, "Be good," and walked out. I never saw him again. He sent birthday cards for a couple of years, unsigned, with $20 bills folded into them like bribes from a guilty ghost. Eventually, those stopped too. My mother never mentioned him again, not even to insult him. It was as if he'd been edited out of our family narrative with surgical precision. After that, the house changed. Or maybe I did. It became a place of quiet calculation. You did what needed to be done, and you didn't ask questions. I learned how to cook by watching YouTube videos in secret, afraid she'd see it as some kind of rebellion. I balanced checkbooks while other girls painted their nails. I forged her signature on school forms because it was easier than reminding her they existed. Teachers called me mature for my age, not realizing that maturity was just a synonym for unparented. I remember once, during a parent-teacher conference, a counselor asked her if she was proud of me. She blinked, as if the question itself was inappropriate. "Claire handles herself," she said, and I felt something inside me tighten into permanence. It wasn't that she was cruel. She didn't yell or hit, but her distance was a kind of violence, the kind that doesn't bruise skin, only identity. I learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to manage, to smooth over, to adjust. I became good at fixing things because it was the only way to feel useful, and being useful was the closest I ever got to being wanted. That habit followed me into adulthood. Every friendship, every romantic relationship. I didn't ask for anything. I became the person who always brought soup, picked people up from the airport, read contracts, remembered birthdays. I thought it made me indispensable. I didn't realize it made me invisible. 2 weeks after the lunch where she whispered, "I didn't ask you to," I was at her house sorting medical documents she'd left scattered across the kitchen counter. She wasn't home, out at one of her silent walks around the neighborhood, the kind she never invited me to join. In the bottom drawer of an old side table, beneath a pile of expired coupons and unread mail, I found a letter, folded neatly, no envelope, written in her familiar narrow script. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but I knew it was for me. "If I die, Claire, know that I did love you. I just didn't know how to show it the way you needed. You were always so capable. I mistook your strength for a lack of need. I'm sorry." That was it. No date, no signature. Just a paragraph of truth buried where no one would find it unless they were cleaning up after her death. I read it 3 times, and it still didn't make sense. It was the most vulnerable thing she'd ever written, and she had hidden it like a confession, not given it, not mailed it, not even handed it to me during her worst moments. I wanted to confront her, to ask why, but I knew she'd deny it, or worse, minimize it. "You weren't supposed to see that," or "It's just words." I folded it back exactly how I'd found it and returned it to the drawer. I didn't take a picture, didn't tell anyone, but something shifted in me, a crack in the cement, a suggestion that maybe she wasn't heartless, just broken in a language I hadn't learned to speak. It was my mother's birthday, her 65th, a number heavy with cultural weight, the kind of milestone that demanded a celebration, even from a woman who despised fuss. My cousin Janice insisted on hosting dinner at her house. "Just family," she said, which meant 30 people, 3 desserts, and forced smiles. I knew better than to expect anything sincere from these gatherings, but I went anyway, with a gift I knew my mother wouldn't care about, a custom-bound collection of old family photos I'd restored and captioned, and a sinking feeling in my chest that I couldn't explain. I hadn't told anyone about the letter. It sat in my mind like a match pressed gently against dry paper, untouched, but always threatening to ignite. The night started predictably, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, compliments on outfits, dishes, kitchen tiles. My mother, seated near the head of the long table, looked smaller than usual, her thin frame dwarfed by the ornate dining chairs. She wore a pale blue blouse I'd bought her last Christmas and never saw her wear before. I took that as a gesture, small, but maybe real. I sat 2 seats away, between my Aunt Linda and Janice's teenage son, who spent the entire meal texting under the table. Nobody asked me about work, about my life, about how things were going since the hospital bills. It was as if the last 6 months had been absorbed into the silence that always followed my name. At some point during dessert, Janice tapped a spoon against her wine glass and stood. "Let's go around and say something we appreciate about Lorraine," she said, smiling. "Something personal." A collective groan followed. This wasn't our style, but people complied. "She taught me to bake," someone said. "She always remembers birthdays," said another. The compliments were vague, safe. Then it was my turn. I hadn't planned anything, but my pulse quickened. I could feel the words forming before I even opened my mouth. I paid for her surgery, I said. No preamble, just the fact, dropped into the room like a stone into still water. When the insurance denied it, I covered the difference. It cost me everything I had. A long silence followed. A few heads turned. My Aunt Linda frowned. Claire? My mother said, voice tight. But I wasn't finished. And I didn't do it for thanks, I continued. Though I won't lie, I wanted to hear it. Just once. I thought maybe something like that would earn me a real place at this table. But I was wrong. Again. My mother stared at me, her eyes glassy but hard. That was never your place to share, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That was between us, like it was a secret. Like a daughter sacrificing everything for her mother's survival was something shameful. I looked around. Nobody defended me. Nobody said thank you on her behalf. They all just watched, waiting, for me to back down, for the scene to pass, for order to return. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Something inside me had snapped. You once wrote a letter, I said quietly, but clearly. I found it in the drawer by the kitchen. You said you loved me, that you didn't know how to show it, that you mistook my strength for not needing anything. Her face changed, just slightly, enough to confirm she knew exactly which letter I meant. I've kept that sentence in my head like a secret handshake, hoping one day you'd say it out loud, that maybe I wasn't crazy, that maybe I wasn't just making this whole thing up. The room was still, utterly frozen. The sound of someone's fork dropping echoed like a gunshot. I looked at my mother, daring her to deny it. She didn't. Instead, she looked away, her face unreadable, and said, You shouldn't have read that. My chest tightened. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or disappear. But instead, I stood, smoothed my dress, and left the room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I simply walked away from a table that had never had a seat for me, except when I brought something they needed. The next morning, my phone was full of unread messages. A few from Janice. Are you okay? She didn't mean it that way. Please don't let this ruin things. One from Aunt Linda suggesting I should apologize for making a private matter public, and two from my mother, both unread. I stared at the screen for nearly an hour before I opened either. The first was one line, You embarrassed me. The second, I'll be fine without your money next time. That was the sentence that finally broke me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was exactly what she believed. That love was obligation, that help was humiliation, that accepting care was weakness, and that I had overstepped, not because I had spoken out, but because I had dared to think my sacrifice had value. I didn't reply. I went for a walk instead. The fall air was sharp, the kind that cleared the lungs and stung the eyes. I wandered past my old high school, past the park where I used to sit alone with a book and a thermos of coffee when home got too small. The memories came uninvited, me waiting on the front steps for rides that never came, the night I burned my hand cooking dinner while she slept through the smoke, the college acceptance letter I opened alone. I had built a life around being indispensable to others, at work, in relationships, for her, and now I was forced to confront a terrifying thought. What if I had been using usefulness as a substitute for love? That afternoon, I packed a small overnight bag and checked into a quiet hotel downtown. Just for the night, I told myself. I needed silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the kind that lets you think. I left my phone on the nightstand, face down. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, the kind of stillness that made every breath feel like a decision. I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Her apology? Her acknowledgement? Or simply the freedom to stop trying so hard for something that had never been mine to win? For the first time in my adult life, I didn't rush to fix what was broken. I let the discomfort sit beside me like a guest I was finally willing to listen to. Later that evening, I remembered something from years ago. A moment so small I had forgotten it until now. I was 12, and I had fallen off my bike, badly. My knee was bleeding, and I had walked myself home, crying. My mother had opened the door, looked at me and said, Why weren't you more careful? Then she made me clean the wound myself. I thought it had toughened me, made me self-sufficient. But now I realized it had taught me that pain was a private thing, that needing someone was shameful, that even as a child, I was expected to be invulnerable, and that expectation had followed me, shaped me, trapped me. I didn't go home the next day. I called my boss and extended my time off. I found a therapist specializing in family estrangement and booked an appointment. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a beginning. a step away from the cycle I had been spinning in since I was a teenager. I thought about the letter I had found, the only time she'd written anything close to affection. I thought about how she had hidden it instead of giving it, about how love, for her, seemed to be a thing best kept secret, unspoken, unconfirmed. I no longer needed her to change. I just needed to stop making her limits my own. By the third day, I turned my phone back on. Sophia, my oldest friend from college, had texted. She'd heard from Beth, who heard from Janice, who of course had told everyone. "You okay?" she wrote. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. No, but maybe that's the first honest thing I've said in a while. It felt like a confession, like stepping out of a costume I hadn't realized I was wearing. Maybe I couldn't fix my mother. Maybe I couldn't rewrite our story, but I could stop performing. I could stop paying for love that would never be delivered. 2 weeks passed before I saw my mother again. Not because I needed time, but because I needed clarity. There's a difference. One is escape. The other is reclamation. I'd spent years mistaking one for the other. When I finally walked up the brick steps of her house, the same steps I used to climb as a child with scraped knees and unspoken hopes, I wasn't carrying a casserole, or medical forms, or debt. I was carrying my decision, my choice to stop living as a translator of her silence. I rang the doorbell like a stranger. She answered like she'd been expecting me, though we hadn't spoken since the dinner. No hello, no pretense, just a single sentence. "You came back." I stepped inside. The house smelled the same. That familiar mix of lemon cleaner, old books, and time. The curtains were drawn, the light filtered and gray. She didn't ask me to sit, but I did anyway. Same living room, same armchairs, different energy. For once, I wasn't here to explain myself, or fix anything. I let the silence stretch, knowing she would expect me to fill it. When she didn't speak, I took a breath and began. "I found the letter," I said, "and I believed every word of it. Which is why I need you to hear this now." Her face twitched, something between fear and resignation, but she didn't interrupt. "I'm done trying to be the daughter you might one day accept," I continued, "because I've realized something painful but true. Your inability to show love doesn't mean I'm unworthy of it. It means you never learned how to give it, and I won't bankrupt myself emotionally or financially trying to teach you." She opened her mouth, then closed it. A slow exhale. "You always take everything so personally," she said, not with anger, but fatigue. And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the most accurate thing she'd ever said about me. I did take it personally. I had made her distance a referendum on my worth. I had treated her coldness like a code to be cracked, but it wasn't about me. It never had been. That realization, simple and devastating, had freed me in ways I couldn't explain. "Maybe I do," I said calmly. "But maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that means I feel things, deeply. Which, by the way, is not a crime." I stood to leave. She didn't stop me. I didn't expect her to. At the door, I turned back once, not for closure, but to see her one last time in the setting that had shaped so much of my identity. She looked smaller than I remembered, not just physically, but spiritually, like a fortress abandoned from the inside. "The letter you wrote," I said. "I'm keeping it, not as proof, not even as comfort, but because it's the closest thing I have to the truth from you. And I'm going to live from that place now. From truth, not performance." She said nothing, but she didn't look away. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, as if I'd finally stepped into my own life instead of the version I had been curating for her approval. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just walked. Back to my car, back to my new life, one where my value wasn't tethered to someone else's silence. I would never get the mother I needed, but I had become the woman I needed, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the point all along. Have you ever tried to buy love with loyalty, silence, or sacrifice, only to realize that love freely given doesn't ask for receipts? If this story speaks to something in you, share your experience below. Someone else might need to hear that walking away doesn't mean you lost. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself.